The harsh winds howled across the barren landscape of the alien moon, kicking up dust and debris from the wreckage of a recent battle. Human soldiers, dressed in heavy armor and armed with advanced weaponry, moved cautiously through the ruins, their eyes scanning for any signs of life. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and smoke as they cleared the area of enemy forces. Despite the victory, the battlefield was far from safe. The Andraxian rebels had set traps everywhere, and the soldiers knew better than to let their guard down. Captain Ethan Voss, a battle-hardened human soldier, surveyed the destruction with grim eyes. His face was marked with exhaustion, his uniform torn and stained from days of fighting. His mission was simple: secure the area and ensure the safety of any survivors. But something about this place didn't feel right. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. Ethan had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him that danger was closer than he thought. As Ethan made his way through the ruins, he suddenly noticed a faint signal on his scanner. It was weak, barely registering on the device, but it was there, a human life sign, or something close to it. His hand immediately went to the trigger of his rifle as he signaled his team to spread out and cover him. They moved silently, knowing that any wrong move could spell their doom. After a few tense minutes of searching, they found her. Hidden among the rubble, lying motionless but breathing, was a figure who appeared to be nothing more than a survivor, maybe a civilian caught in the crossfire. But as they approached, Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. The woman lying before him wasn't a regular civilian. She was an Andraxian princess, a member of the royal family. No doubt, judging by her distinct markings and the intricate design of her torn clothes. The moment Ethan's eyes met hers, a strange wave of recognition passed through him. There was something about her, something that spoke of power and nobility even in her broken state. But he wasn't about to let his guard down. The Andraxians were notorious for their cunning and treachery, and anyone with royal blood was likely a target or a weapon. Ethan raised his weapon, ready to defend himself, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly pushed herself to her feet, her skin glowing faintly despite the dirt and blood that stained it. The blue hue of her skin, the sharp angles of her face, and the regal poise with which she carried herself made it clear that she was no ordinary person. "You," she gasped, her voice weak but full of command. "You are human." Ethan was taken aback by the intensity of her words, but his training kicked in. "Stay down. I'm here to help you," he said, his voice firm. He had seen enough to know when someone was in danger, and this woman, despite her obvious injury, was in no condition to fight. She ignored him, slowly rising to her feet with a grace that seemed out of place in the midst of such destruction. Her eyes never left Ethan's as she wiped the grime from her face, her hands trembling as she tried to regain some semblance of dignity. She was a princess, and even in this broken state, she refused to let herself appear weak. For a brief moment, Ethan watched her in silence. He had been in countless dangerous situations before, but there was something about this alien princess that intrigued him. She wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered. She wasn't scared, nor did she beg for help. Instead, she acted as if she had control of the situation, as if she were still the ruler of her people, even though her kingdom was now nothing more than a distant memory. The silence between them stretched on, broken only by the distant sounds of the battlefield. Ethan felt a strange urge to lower his weapon, but he knew better. The Andraxians were known for their tricks and manipulation. The last thing he needed was to get caught off guard. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp as he studied her every move. He needed answers. If this woman was truly a princess, then she could be valuable or dangerous. She met his gaze, her eyes full of defiance. "I am Princess Tylara of the Andraxian Empire," she said, her words tinged with both pride and sorrow. "And I am not your enemy." Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened. The Andraxians were part of a powerful alliance that had caused untold destruction across the galaxy. If she was who she claimed to be, then she could be both a key to stopping the war or a deadly threat. The situation was complicated, and Ethan wasn't sure whether to trust her. Before he could respond, a faint noise echoed from the distance. Footsteps, rapid and approaching fast. Ethan's eyes snapped to the horizon. He could hear the distinct hum of AI drones, machines designed for one purpose: to hunt down and eliminate threats. He had no time to debate this woman's identity. He needed to act, and fast. "Get down," he barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a nearby alleyway. Taylora hesitated for a moment, but then her survival instincts kicked in. She followed Ethan, her graceful movements surprising him. She may have been injured, but she wasn't helpless. Ethan's team quickly moved into position as the drones grew nearer. The AI had detected the life signs from Taylora and were now on their way to eliminate her. The drone's sleek, metallic bodies glinted in the dim light as they hovered above the wreckage, scanning for their target. With barely a second to spare, Ethan activated his cloaking device, disappearing from sight. He motioned for Taylora to stay close. Together, they moved silently, dodging the AI drones and making their way deeper into the ruins. The air was thick with tension as they crept through the crumbling city, each step taking them closer to safety. As they rounded a corner, Ethan stole a glance at Taylora. Her face, still marked by dirt and blood, had a new expression, one of determination. Despite the terror she must have felt, she held her head high, as if she were still a queen leading her people. For the first time since their encounter, Ethan felt a flicker of something unexpected: respect. There was something about her, something that made him believe that she wasn't just another alien to fight. There was more to her story, and he was about to learn what it was. The encounter was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be far more dangerous, and the stakes higher than either of them could imagine. But for now, they had survived. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The moment Ethan and Taylora ducked behind a crumbling structure, the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with tension. The faint hum of AI drones echoed in the distance, their sensors sweeping the area. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen plenty of combat in his life, but something about the pursuit of these machines felt different. They weren't just hunting for any ordinary target. They were after a royal, an Andraxian princess, and that made her a valuable prize for the enemy. Taylora, despite her injuries, moved with surprising speed, her alien agility helping her keep up with Ethan. Ethan couldn't help but notice her composure. She wasn't panicking, wasn't pleading for help. She moved like someone who had been trained to survive, even in the most dire of situations. She may have been a princess, but in that moment, she felt more like a soldier than anything else. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, his eyes darting around for a way out. The cloaking device he had activated made them invisible to the eye sensors, but it wasn't perfect. The drones could still detect any sudden movements or irregularities in the environment. It was a race against time. Ethan led her through a maze of broken buildings, his mind working quickly. He knew he had to get them out of sight, and fast. The AI drones would be relentless, and if they found them, it would be over. He had to make sure they could escape before the machines closed in. Taylora, still shaken but determined, followed closely behind. As they ran, she spoke in a low voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm not helpless, you know," she said, her tone sharp and full of pride. "I know how to handle myself in a fight." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her words. He had expected her to be afraid, perhaps begging for his protection. But instead, she seemed more focused than ever. "I didn't say you were helpless," he replied, his voice softening just a little. "But these drones won't stop until they find us." The sound of the drones grew louder, the machines swooping closer with every passing second. Ethan's mind raced. There had to be a way out. He spotted a narrow alley to their left, leading to what appeared to be a collapsed tunnel system. It was their best chance, but it wouldn't be easy to get there without being detected. "Follow me," Ethan ordered, and without waiting for a response, he darted toward the alley, pulling Silara along with him. The ground beneath them was uneven, covered in debris and the remnants of destroyed structures. Every step they took was a calculated risk. One wrong move, and the drones would be on them. Just as they reached the alley, a loud buzzing sound filled the air. Ethan spun around, his pulse racing. A drone was flying overhead, so close that he could feel the heat from its engines. It was scanning the ground below, its sensors searching for any sign of movement. Ethan froze, his breath held tight in his chest, praying the cloaking device would be enough to keep them hidden. Silara's breath was shallow, and her body was tense with fear, but she didn't make a sound. Ethan could feel her grip on his arm tightening, but she remained silent. It was clear she understood the stakes. The slightest noise would give them away, and they would be caught. The drone hovered for what felt like an eternity. Ethan's mind raced, trying to predict the drone's next move. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. It would eventually pass, and then they would have a few precious seconds to move again. The moment the drone turned away, they would have to run. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the drone flew off into the distance. Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Let's move," he said, breaking the silence. Without hesitation, he grabbed Silara's hand and pulled her toward the tunnel entrance. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but it was their best option. The walls were jagged, the air stale, and heavy with the scent of decay. They moved through the tunnel as quickly as they could, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Ethan knew they didn't have much time. The AI drones would eventually regroup and start searching the area again. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Ethan stopped and listened. He could hear the faint hum of machinery from above, the sound of the AI drones searching for them. It was only a matter of time before they would be discovered again. "Where are we going?" Silara asked, her voice steady, but there was a hint of concern in it. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "There's a safe house not far from here. We'll be able to lay low for a while and regroup." Silara nodded, but there was something in her eyes. "I can help," she said, her voice almost pleading now. "I know how to disable their systems. I've done it before." Ethan looked at her for a moment, considering her words. He had no doubt she was capable. He had seen her skills firsthand when she had deactivated one of the AI drones earlier. But this wasn't just about disabling a few machines. It was about survival. If she could truly help, then they might have a chance. "I don't trust the AI," Ethan said bluntly. "But if you think you can help, I'm listening." Silara gave him a small, confident smile. "I'll get us through this," she said, her voice filled with determination. They moved quickly through the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick walls. Every so often, they would stop and listen for any signs of movement from above. The AI drones were relentless, but they weren't invincible. Ethan knew they could outsmart them if they were careful. As they neared the exit of the tunnel, Ethan's heart rate quickened. They were close to the safe house, but they still had to make it past the AI drones. The next few moments would be crucial. Ethan turned to Silara, his face serious. "Stay close. We move fast, and we don't make a sound." Silara nodded, her eyes fixed on him. Together, they stepped out into the open, where the cold winds whipped around them. The moon's surface stretched out in all directions, a vast and unforgiving landscape. The safe house was just ahead, hidden among the jagged rocks and debris. But getting there wouldn't be easy. They had to make it across open ground, where they were vulnerable to the drones. Every step felt like a risk, but they had no choice. The safe house was their only chance. The AI drones were closing in, but Ethan had a plan. He had to trust Silara's abilities and his own instincts. They had to make it, no matter the cost. Ethan's heart raced as he and Silara crouched behind the jagged rocks, trying to stay out of sight of the AI drones overhead. Every minute felt like an eternity. The sound of the drones searching the area was growing louder, their mechanical hums cutting through the air like a chilling reminder that danger was never far away. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. They had to reach the safe house without being caught. Silara was still beside him, her alien skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the moon's surface. Despite the chaos of the situation, she seemed oddly calm, her eyes constantly scanning the environment for any sign of movement. Ethan couldn't help but admire her composure. She was unlike any other alien he had ever encountered. Where most would be panicking, Zylara was calculating, coldly focused on survival. But even with her calm, Ethan knew that they were both at risk. And he had to be ready for anything. Ethan peered out from behind the rocks, keeping an eye on the sky. The drones were hovering in a wide pattern, sweeping over the area in search of any signs of movement. He could see the faint glint of their metallic bodies from the corner of his eye. The AI drones were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to find them. But he also knew they were not invincible. He had seen these machines fall before, and with Zylara's help, he hoped they could do it again. Silara moved beside him, her movements silent, graceful even in the tension of the moment. She leaned closer to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't trust me, do you?" Her words were calm, but there was an underlying edge to them, a subtle challenge. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her bluntness. "I don't trust anyone," Ethan replied quietly, keeping his eyes on the drones above. "I've seen too much betrayal, too many lies. It's how I've survived." Silara's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. She seemed to consider his words for a moment before responding. "I'm not like them," she said softly, but with a certain fierceness. "I don't betray people. I do what needs to be done to survive, but I don't hurt others for the sake of it." Ethan looked at her more closely now. There was something in her gaze, something that told him she wasn't lying. He had fought beside many soldiers in his career, and there was a certain look in a person's eyes when they had been through hell and back, when they had learned the hard way to trust no one. Stylara had that look, but she also had a different kind of intensity in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She was a survivor, just like him. "I didn't say you were like the others," Ethan muttered, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He wanted to trust her, but after everything he had been through, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not now. Not when they were both on the verge of being hunted by the Eye. The tension between them grew thick as they crouched in silence, watching the drones continue their search. Every now and then, one of the machines would pass too close for comfort, and they would freeze, holding their breath, hoping they wouldn't be detected. But despite their careful movements, Ethan couldn't ignore the feeling that time was running out. The longer they stayed hidden, the greater the risk that they would be spotted. "We need to move," Ethan whispered urgently, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The safe house wasn't far now, but they needed to make it across the open ground. The drones would be more likely to spot them out there, and there was no way to hide if they were detected. Silara nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the situation. She didn't need to be told twice. She was already up and moving, her swift and graceful steps carrying her forward without a sound. Ethan followed her, keeping a tight grip on his weapon, ready for anything. They moved quickly, the distance between them and the safe house shrinking with every step. But the closer they got, the more exposed they became. They reached a clearing, a stretch of barren land that separated them from the safe house. The ground was rough, uneven, and scattered with debris from the destruction of the battlefield. There was no cover here, no place to hide. It was an open field, and the drones had a clear line of sight. Ethan stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. They had to make it across this field, and they had to do it fast. "We need to run," Ethan said, his voice tight. He could feel the pressure building inside him. One wrong move, and it would all be over. Zylara didn't hesitate. "On 3, she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. 1, 2, 3. In an instant, they were both running, their footsteps pounding against the ground as they made their way toward the safe house. Ethan's eyes were locked on the distant structure, his every muscle screaming with effort. The wind whipped past him, and the cold air cut through his suit, but he ignored it. All that mattered was reaching the safe house. Behind them, the drones began to take notice. The AI machine's sensors detected the movement, and they instantly changed course, zooming toward the open field. Ethan's breath hitched in his chest as he pushed himself harder, urging his legs to carry him faster. He could hear the drones growing closer, the sound of their engines deafening in the quiet night. They were almost there, just a few more steps, but the drones were catching up. Silara's voice rang out above the noise of the wind and the drones. "I can disable them. I know how." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Do it," he shouted. Without breaking stride, Silara reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button, and suddenly, the drones faltered in their pursuit. Their engines sputtered, and they began to slow down, their sensors flickering. It was enough for them to make it to the safe house, where they ducked inside just as the drones reached the edge of the clearing. They were safe for now, but the tension between them was still thick, and as Ethan looked at Silara, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had saved them, but she had also revealed that she was capable of more than he had originally thought. The question now was whether he could trust her completely. Silara turned to him, her expression serious. "We made it," she said softly, "but this is just the beginning." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps. They had survived this round, but there was still much more to come, and he wasn't sure if Silara was just the ally he needed, or if she was hiding something from him. The safe house was nothing more than a small, hidden structure tucked deep beneath the jagged rocks of the moon's surface. Inside, the air was cold and stale, but it offered shelter from the AI drones that were still out there, searching for them. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief as the heavy door slid shut behind them. For a moment, the world outside seemed distant, like a nightmare fading into the dark. They had made it, but the feeling of safety was fleeting. Silara was already pacing around the room, her mind working furiously. She moved like she was accustomed to planning her next steps in the midst of chaos. Ethan, on the other hand, leaned against the wall, exhausted but vigilant. His eyes never left her. There was something about her that had been bothering him ever since they escaped the drones. Her calmness in the face of danger was impressive, but it also raised a lot of questions. Why was she so calm? Why did she always seem to know exactly what to do? "I still don't get it," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "How did you know how to disable those drones? You told me you didn't trust the AI." Silara stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes, normally full of calm assurance, flickered with something deeper, something he hadn't seen before. "I don't trust the AI," she replied, her voice steady. "But I do know how they operate. I spent years studying their systems, their weaknesses. It's part of my training. As a princess, I had to know how to protect myself from all kinds of threats, including the AI. That knowledge was my only chance of surviving." Ethan frowned. "You've been trained to fight them. Even before all this." Silara hesitated for a moment, as if she was debating whether or not to tell him more. She seemed to be struggling with something inside her. Then, with a slow breath, she spoke again. "Yes, but it's not just that. There's more you don't know." Ethan's curiosity was piqued. "What do you mean?" She walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not just any princess. My family has always been involved in the fight against the AI. I was part of a resistance movement, a group dedicated to stopping their takeover of the galaxy. My father, the king, was a key figure in the rebellion. But when the AI launched their attack, everything changed. My family was targeted, and I was forced to flee. My life was never truly my own after that." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "So, you're telling me you've been part of the resistance this whole time?" Silara nodded slowly. Yes, I may be a princess, but I've never had the luxury of a normal life. I spent my entire existence fighting against the Eye's reign. My father believed that if we could stop them early enough, we could prevent the galaxy from falling into their control. But he didn't succeed. Ethan stepped forward, his mind racing with new information. Then why are you still running? If you've been trained to fight them, why didn't you fight back when they attacked? Silara's gaze darkened, and for the first time since he met her, Ethan saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. Because, she said softly, there's something you don't know about the AI. They have someone on the inside, someone who knows our every move, every plan. Someone who betrayed us. Ethan's blood ran cold as the weight of her words settled in. You mean, someone from your side? She nodded grimly. Yes, there's a traitor within the rebellion, someone who sold us out to the AI. The attack wasn't just a random assault. It was planned, and the AI knew exactly where we would be. The only reason I'm alive right now is because I managed to escape. But I've been running ever since, always looking over my shoulder. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. And you think this traitor is still out there? I know they are, Silara replied, her voice tight with anger. The AI doesn't act without someone guiding them. Whoever this traitor is, they're still feeding information to the AI. And if I don't stop them, they'll come for me. And anyone else who stands in their way. Ethan stood there for a long moment, his mind trying to process everything she had just said. The rebellion, the traitor, the AI's control, it was all more than he had ever expected. He had been thrown into this battle without knowing the full scope of the war. But now, with Silara's revelation, everything had changed. They weren't just running from drones. They were up against something far more dangerous. A shadow lurking within the rebellion itself. So what do we do now? Ethan asked, his voice low. How do we stop this traitor? Silara's eyes narrowed, a determined glint in her gaze. We find them. We stop them before they can do any more damage. And we destroy the AI's ability to track us. We'll need to gather information, plan our next move carefully. But we're not alone in this fight. The rebellion still has supporters. We just need to reach them. Ethan could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to survive this long. She was no longer just a princess. She was a soldier, a leader, and someone he could trust. At least for now. But how do we even know who to trust? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with doubt. If there's a traitor among your people, how can we be sure anyone is on our side? Silara's expression softened for a moment. I know it's hard to trust anyone right now, but we don't have a choice. If we don't find the traitor and stop them, we won't survive. The rebellion, everything we fought for, will be lost, and the AI will take over, just as they always planned. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. They were fighting for more than just their own survival now. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. Just then, a soft beep echoed from Silara's wristband. She glanced down at it, her eyes widening in shock. They found us, she whispered, her voice full of urgency. The AI knows where we are. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What do we do? Silara looked up at him, her gaze fierce and resolute. We fight. We fight until the end. The air inside the safe house was thick with tension. Ethan's heart pounded as he stood by Silara, both of them staring at the blinking red light on her wristband. The AI had found them. It was only a matter of time before the drones and the full force of the AI's army arrived at their location. Their window of safety had just closed, and there was no going back. They were about to face their most dangerous battle yet. Silara quickly moved to the corner of the room, pulling up a holographic map of the area on a nearby table. We don't have much time, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos closing in. The AI is already mobilizing. We need to get to the uplink station and disable their tracking systems before they can lock onto our location completely. Ethan stepped closer to her, his eyes scanning the map. The plan was risky, but it was their only option. The uplink station was a heavily guarded facility located several kilometers away. Getting there would mean crossing open ground filled with AI drones, sentries, and automated defenses. But if they succeeded, they could sever the AI's ability to track them, giving them a chance to escape and regroup. "I'll cover you," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "You just get to the uplink and shut it down." Fahilara looked up at him, a flicker of something, perhaps gratitude, passing through her expression. But it was quickly replaced by the fierce determination he had come to expect from her. "We do this together, Ethan," she said firmly. "We either make it out alive, or we don't. But I'm not leaving you behind." Ethan met her gaze, nodding. Despite the uncertainty ahead, he knew they couldn't afford to second-guess themselves. They had to fight with everything they had, or the AI would crush them. The door to the safe house creaked open, and they slipped out into the dark night, the cold air biting at their skin. The moon's pale light cast long shadows across the desolate landscape. The sound of distant AI drones echoed through the silence, their mechanical hums a constant reminder of the enemy closing in. Saylara led the way, moving quickly and quietly, her alien agility allowing her to cover ground faster than Ethan. He stayed close behind, his senses alert to every sound, every movement. They had no cloaking devices, no advanced technology to protect them this time. It was just the two of them, up against a vast, merciless machine that knew no mercy. As they neared the open field that lay between them and the uplink station, the air grew even more oppressive. Ethan could see the outlines of AI sentries patrolling the area, their glowing red eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of life. They were too far to be seen, but Ethan knew that any wrong move could expose them. They crouched low behind a mound of debris, trying to stay hidden from the sentries. Saylara glanced at Ethan, her expression tense. "We need to take them out quietly. We can't afford to alert the whole army." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. He had dealt with AI soldiers before, but these were different. They were more advanced, faster, and deadlier. He had no doubt that they would fight to the death to protect the uplink station, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Saylara pulled out a small, high-powered blaster from her bag, checking the settings. "I'll take the one on the left. You handle the one on the right. On my mark." Ethan didn't hesitate. He had worked with soldiers before, but something about this mission felt different. Maybe it was the stakes, or maybe it was because he was fighting alongside Saylara, a princess-turned-soldier, someone who understood the price of survival. "Ready?" she whispered. "Always," Ethan replied. They both stood at the same time, moving swiftly and silently towards their targets. Ethan's target was a tall, heavily armored AI sentry, its red eyes scanning the surroundings as it paced back and forth. He crept up behind it, his breath steady despite the adrenaline rushing through him. With one fluid motion, he pulled out his knife and drove it into the sentry's power core, disabling it instantly. The machine's body jerked once before crumpling to the ground, silent and still. Saylara had already dealt with her own sentry, taking it down with a precise shot to its central processor. She didn't waste any time. "That's one down," she said, her voice cool and collected. "Let's move." Ethan followed her as they continued to make their way toward the uplink station. The closer they got, the more the tension in the air grew. They could hear the sounds of distant AI drones, but they stayed low, using the terrain for cover. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. One mistake, and they would be surrounded. As they neared the perimeter of the uplink station, the sounds of the drones grew louder. It was almost as if the enemy was aware that they were getting closer, sensing their presence. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But he had no choice but to push forward. They reached the entrance to the uplink station, which was guarded by a series of automated turrets and AI sentries. This was it, the final stretch. If they could get inside and disable the AI's tracking systems, they would have a chance to escape. But the risk was higher than ever. said Lara. Turned to Ethan, her eyes locked on his. Once we're inside, there's no turning back, she said, her voice low and intense. We disable the system, then we get out. Fast. Ethan nodded. Let's do it. They made their move, darting toward the entrance under the cover of darkness. The first turret spotted them, but Lara was faster, taking it down with a well-placed shot. The second turret followed, and Ethan swiftly moved to disable it. They worked in perfect sync, each anticipating the other's moves. With the outer defenses down, they entered the uplink station, their hearts pounding in their chests. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and cold, filled with the hum of machines and the constant buzz of AI activity. But they didn't have time to marvel at the technology. Their mission was clear: destroy the tracking systems. Lara quickly moved to a console, her fingers flying over the controls. Ethan stood guard, his weapon raised, scanning for any signs of movement. The countdown was already ticking in his head. They had only a few minutes before the AI sent reinforcements. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Just as Lara finished inputting the commands, an alarm blared to life, and the door to the control room slid open. Reinforcements were coming. The final assault had begun. Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. This was it, the moment that would determine their fate. The air inside the uplink station was thick with tension. Ethan stood with his back pressed against the wall, his gun ready in his hand, while Lara focused on the control panel, typing furiously to disable the AI's tracking system. The lights in the room flickered, and the sound of the AI reinforcements pounding toward them grew louder. Their time was running out. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. They had to act fast. Ethan glanced at Lara, her face illuminated by the glow of the console, her expression determined. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she didn't stop. He could see how much this meant to her. This was her fight, her chance to finally stop the AI from taking control of the galaxy. And yet she was here, fighting beside him, trusting him. We need to move, he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. They're coming. We don't have much time. Lara didn't even look up from the screen. Just give me a few more seconds, she replied, her fingers dancing over the keys. Once I shut this down, the AI won't be able to track us. We'll have a chance to escape, to disappear for good. Ethan nodded, scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. He had never felt the weight of a mission more than this moment. It was the final push, the final chance to defeat the AI and end this nightmare. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that even if they succeeded, their battle wasn't over. There would always be more to fight for, more enemies, more obstacles. But right now, there was only one thing that mattered: getting out alive. The door to the control room suddenly slammed open with a deafening crash. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A squad of AI soldiers, heavily armed and prepared for battle, stormed into the room. They moved with robotic precision, their cold, mechanical eyes glowing red as they locked onto their targets. Ethan fired immediately, taking out the first soldier with a well-aimed shot. Lara, without missing a beat, pulled out her blaster and fired at another soldier, hitting it square in the chest. The AI's body convulsed before collapsing to the ground, but there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers were coming, and they had to hold their ground. Lara, Ethan shouted, keeping his eyes on the advancing AI. How much longer? Almost there. Lara yelled back, her voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. Just one more minute. Ethan fired again, narrowly missing a soldier's head. He ducked behind a control panel as an explosion shook the room, sending sparks flying from the walls. The AI soldiers were relentless, and for every one they took down, two more seemed to take their place. Lara's fingers flew over the console again, her face set in grim determination. She was so close. Ethan could see the strain on her face, the exhaustion from hours of running, fighting, and evading the AI. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The galaxy's future depended on her. "Got it," she shouted, her voice a mix of relief and triumph. "I've disabled the tracking system. They won't be able to follow us anymore." The words barely registered in Ethan's mind before he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. More AI reinforcements were coming, and they needed to get out of there fast. "Move," Sci-Fi ordered, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the exit. "We've got what we came for. Now let's go." Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed her through the narrow hallways, the sound of their boots echoing off the walls as they ran. Behind them, the AI soldiers were closing in, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. But Sci-Fi led the way, and Ethan trusted her every step of the way. They reached the exit just as a blast from an AI weapon sent a chunk of the wall crumbling beside them. The force of the explosion threw them both off balance, but they managed to steady themselves and keep moving. The cold, open air of the outside world hit them as they burst through the door and into the night. Ethan barely had time to register the relief that flooded his chest before Xylara was already pulling him toward a waiting transport. The ship, a sleek and heavily armored vessel, was their only way out of the danger zone. The AI would be after them in no time, but for now, they had a brief window of escape. Xylara jumped into the pilot's seat, her hands moving expertly over the controls. Ethan followed quickly, taking his place beside her, his eyes constantly scanning the sky for any signs of pursuit. They lifted off the ground with a smooth, controlled motion, the stars above them growing larger as they ascended into the void of space. Once they were clear of the planet's atmosphere, Xylara exhaled, her shoulders sagging as the tension of the past few hours began to lift. They had done it. They had outsmarted the air. They had won. But even as the adrenaline began to fade, Ethan couldn't help but feel that the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "We did it," Xylara said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and relief. She finally allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "We're free." Ethan leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. They had just completed a major victory. But the war was far from over. The AI would regroup, rebuild, and come after them again. But for now, they had earned a moment of peace. "We'll keep fighting," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We have to. For the galaxy. For everyone who's counting on us." Xylara nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "There's more to do. We're not finished yet." As the transport soared through space, the vastness of the galaxy stretched out before them, full of possibilities, dangers, and new beginnings. Ethan knew that their fight wasn't just for survival. It was for hope, for freedom, for a future where the AI didn't control everything. And as long as they were still alive, they would keep fighting. Together. The journey was just beginning.